Hello, folks, and welcome to New Geometry. It's George Leoniak. I'm super thrilled to be here with another video. Today, we're going to be really getting into Metatron's cube, or the cube in general. We're going to go back to the basics. I know a lot of my sacred geometry has been working with the golden circles, seed of life, and drawing the icosahedron and dodecahedron correctly. But today we're going to work with just the regular cube, and we're going to look at it from the view that is shown in Metatron's cube, or drawing it from the flower of life in this perspective, because many of my other drawings where you put the dodecahedron oriented this way, the cube will be off center. But we're going to put the cube back front and center, and we're going to nest all the Platonic solids. I'm going to show you probably 30 something forms or more. I have all of them built here. I have all the slides set up, and we're going to show you how all these forms are going to be contained within this cube. And it's going to be, slightly different than the way Metatron's cube depicts it. But let's jump over to the sharing the screen here. I have 72 slides. This is a huge video. I'm going to try and go through it relatively quickly. You can pause the screen and check out certain images more. All this could be, relatively easy to draw with some basic sacred geometry techniques. And as I said, we're going to get back to the basics. We're going to work with the flower of life as the 19-circle pattern that is just, quintessential to sacred geometry, shown in many iconography all over the place: stickers, t-shirts, hats, tattoos, all over the place. We see this universal design in many, many different cultures. And, the only thing that I'm going to do for lines are these light gray ones. And the rest of this pattern that I'm about to show you is going to, as we get further into it and show where, it evolves with phi ratio, we're going to add some additional circles throughout. And I'm going to put the fruit of life in my drawing, which is this circle here is, 1/2 of the larger light gray circles now. And this pattern is the 13 circles. And what is Metatron's cube is based on, well, those 13 circles. Of course, when you draw Metatron's cube, most of the time it's shown drawn out with these 61 circles to finally get to the distal points to make the connections. You erase all that other stuff and you're left with the 13 circles like this. Many ways to do it, but that's primarily what Metatron's cube, and it's said to contain all the Platonic solids, as many of my videos show. I'm not really going to get into that too much in this video. It doesn't contain the phi ratio forms, the icosahedron, dodecahedron. It's ultimately good at drawing the cube and the icosahedron, cuboctahedron, shapes that don't involve phi ratio directly. For many of my other videos, I have modified this whole system so the cube is integrated, and we'll get to these images later on. But the main drawing is not the cube as the outer shape of this. It's often the icosahedron, the large hexagon, or the Rhombic Traicontahedron. Images are coming later. But primarily, we're going to do this whole video through the cube perspective as if it were the large hexagon. And the interesting thing about this view that I don't really run into issues with the other drawing modalities of either what I call square view, where you draw the cube like this, or the pentagonal view, where the cube is kind of at an awkward angle that we don't regularly work with the cube in that, because we usually draw dodecahedrons, icosahedrons there. But there's really no conflict in those drawing methods to, like, this is the cube, this is, the pentagon structure. It works with the phi ratio form as well. But this view really is a blend of, you don't know what that hexagon can be. It can be so many different forms. We can turn into so many things. But today, like I said, we're going to focus on the cube. And one of the fundamental forms within this, so you can keep seeing this question, what's in the cube at the top, is and there's writing on a lot of these slides, which I won't go through all the numbers, but they are going to give you a little information on each of the forms that I'll be showing. Of course, this is the star tetrahedron that is, the stella octangula, because there's an octahedra within here. We'll show that in the next slide. but it's, two tetrahedra. There's one pointing up and the one pointing down. And really in this view, we're looking at it just oriented this way within the cube with this vertex right here. And it fits within this square. So if we rotate this to look like that, this one now is oriented just like we'd be looking at it in our drawing here with the edges of the cube. So that's just, classic sacred geometry. We're just connecting these lines and we get this fundamental form, which is the two tetrahedron. Here it is by itself, also known as the Merkaba. And from this perspective, the Merkaba just, you're really looking at the vertices of it. These other vertices are not oriented as if it were spinning. If it were to be spinning it, these flat surfaces would be here, but in this view, we're looking at it more angled like that. Perfect hexagon around it. It's the cube is there. And now once we remove the stellated points off of the cube, I'll keep reaching over my side here to get the forms. So within this, and these are mostly going to be all to scale, inside this stellated tetrahedron, right, the stellated octahedron, excuse me, are these tetrahedral caps. There's 8 of them, which are giving you the vertices of the cube. But within that is the little octahedron, which you see there. And of course, that's the dual of the cube, meaning that if I were to put this inside the cube, the vertices, put one in front of the other, if you could see that, the vertices, 6 vertices of this are touching the 6 faces of the cube. And when we rotate the cube once again, all of a sudden, we get the triangular face that's in our drawing here. So these two are just naturally in this drawing. You can draw this in the seed of life. You can draw it just in one little hexagon. Once you do the crisscrossing of lines, you automatically end up with these fundamental forms. So, hopefully here it is by itself. We're just going back through the basics, orienting the perspective to this, because all the drawings are going to be from this view of working within the flower of life. In fact, at this point, there isn't really any need for the outer circles. Everything can be done in the seed of life. The next big form that we're going to talk about is the vector equilibrium, the Cuboctahedron. And we are looking at it with the triangular face like that. And it's once again back in the cube. And it is the Cuboctahedron because we can either truncate these edges of the cube and come up with this form right at the midpoint along this edge. So picture a square right at midpoint to midpoint to midpoint to midpoint. You do that around, and then you take off those edges of the cube, you come up with the Cuboctahedron. I'll show you what the octahedron, if it was a larger octahedron was on this, it would make it, it would go beyond the surface of the cube, and that's where the octahedron is. So this is really well-studied, well-researched shape, the jitterbug by Buckminster Fuller, Nassim Harriman's work, and taking it further, I've got some slides of his isotropic vector matrix coming up, or not his, but that work that's been brought forward by him further. So yes, this is just the drawing by itself, and I'm just showing you in the sacred geometry how easy it is to draw. All the connection points are just easily laid out within our pattern, and we can, just then draw the cube around it, and we can see how these forms are just not two-dimensional shapes here. These 2D flat images, they're holding the template and blueprint for these three-dimensional forms, which will, when they're drawn with accurate dimensions, are a builder's template to create and reconstruct these forms. And that's something that has always been important to me in the construction of sacred geometry. So this is a 664 tetrahedron grid. And it's just picture 8 of these little star tetrahedron coming together in each of these quadrants, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 little ones coming together to create this crisscross network that would also give you the vertices of that Cuboctahedron. So I have this one little built here too. I just have the octahedron caps that are also going through the space in the middle there. So just pretend those aren't there. But that would be it, a kind of spiky little thing. But it is also it is also, what's the word I'm looking for? It's also in the cube. That's what I'm looking for. This is just directly in the cube, and this is what it looks like when we put it back into the cube and lay out all the lines. I guess I'm missing some lines there on the back edge of that for this drawing, but this is what it would look like, all found back in the cube, and we've got the tetrahedrons crossing, and then we've got the Cuboctahedron edge right there going across as well. So the next one that we're going to go to is, now all that is contained within the cube, but like I was just saying a moment ago, if we have a larger octahedron like this one here, which is built to scale to this one, and I like to visualize this as if your octahedron is, remember the little one I had that was inside the cube in the beginning. It's going to become an important concept. If you picture it growing and getting bigger, but the cube does not change shape, and it grows exponentially, grows large enough so that it compounds with your cube, meaning that it's going to go above it like a little pyramid above the cube and stick out to this side over here, right? Portion of it will stick out that side. This is what it looks like. In fact, that whole outer hexagon now is actually a combination of the dark blue and black cube edges, because that octahedron is now matching 1-for-1 over top of this hexagon. So the hexagon at this point is a mixture of both the large octahedron, which is, focus on this edge right here, the black edge is going across the dark blue edge, and that's signifying that there's a compound of the forms like this. Oh, I had this one built, I forgot. So this is what we're looking at there. We're looking at it just like this. So there's our octahedron. You can see it makes a hexagon, and as this edge comes down, it crosses the cube edge, and that's the intersection point right at the middle. So you can see if we truncated this all the way around, we would come all the way back down to our cuboctahedron, which would be looking like that, right? So these two are the dual forms, the rhombic dodecahedron, what I haven't gone to yet, but hopefully this little form provides the visual of how this looks from this perspective, where the hexagon is, you can't tell which hexagon is which until you visualize that and depict the lines that way. Because when you look at it this way, it clearly looks very different with the square and another square around it. And that's what I call the square view drawing. So let's take a look at, I've just removed the cuboctahedron lines in this one. I'm setting it up to make the rhombic dodecahedron, which is this shape, which is basically showing that from that view, we have the octahedron edge, and there's the cube edge. They're not drawn on here, but the one would go this length, and that makes a rhombic face, a diamond face that looks like that. And basically, it looks like a cube that's just been turned upside down, right? That's all that's happened there. So it's a kind of funny drawing because, you know, we don't really visualize the cube looking like, you know, the cube usually like to view it the other way where the flat is on the top. At least that's how I draw these. But when we do all the lines and we know we have an octahedron and the cube edge is still here, same hexagon, just 3 more lines, and all of a sudden we've turned it into the compound of the 2 of those like that. So sacred geometry is, you know, there's so many different ways to look at these shapes of these 2-dimensional shapes, which are carrying so much information in them beyond just the elementary lines that we have here. Okay, now we're going to get into some forms that are really a lot less talked about and very seldom drawn, but this is a lot of exploration is going to go on around this throughout the rest of this presentation, because we've coming up with the truncated version of the octahedron. Okay, so this little truncated octahedron we're going to picture is inside the cube. So these little square face that are a little darker or a little thicker lines are on the surface of the cube. So just picture them pressing up, and there'll be 6 of them. And you can picture this octahedron is poking through, but we've chopped it off there. So it's smaller than the compound one that I just showed you, smaller than this dodecahedron one where it's overlapping. Picture that line now sinking inside the form. And it's going in, this section. This is where this little fruit of life circle comes into play, and why those little light gray lines that I've set up here, they're at the intersection points where we make these little rectangles at those spots, which are actually square faces. They look like rectangles there, but they're square. And this is a truncation that is going to give us perfect hexagon, regular hexagon faces, meaning all the edge lengths are equal, 120-degree inner angle. And there it is once again, right here in the seed of life. A cube is going out to the further fruit of life edges here for the cube, right? So it's kind of neat to visualize that this one is right here inside this, just like be like this in this diagram. We got one square face over to the side, butting up there, and one over there. So we'd have a broad face like that, and this would just go right inside there. I guess it would be like that. Yeah, square face towards you, square on either side, square up and down, and we've just taken off those. So maybe I could put it in front, and it would look just like line up like that. It's quite easy to show the relationship of the forms a little easier in this square view, because once we tilt everything to the hexagon view, it's a little harder to visualize, but there's a lot of versatility from this perspective. Okay, so there is a form. Now we're going to go beyond the cube here, just like we did. And I really like this form. We'll show some of the other things that are related to it in just a moment. But this is a tetraxis hexahedron. Now, here's our cube once again. And of course, we're looking at it from this perspective with the cube like that. And we have an octahedron inside this that is pushing up this point right here. Okay, so it's octahedron, 6 of these points sticking up a little bit, creating these isosceles triangles on the edges. So it's not fully inflated, let's just say, it hasn't gone all the way to this phase where the octahedron has gotten really large. So picture this as like a halfway point between this octahedron being shrunken back down into the cube. It's getting larger in 6 directions, getting to the max points where it's intersecting the cube edges. It could get larger and nest the cube in there, but this is where we're going to stop with this form. All right, so, but that's what it looks like. And it is the octahedron that's being truncated for this form is the octahedron that is making the this form, the tetraxis hexahedron, is the octahedron related to this truncated one down here, okay? So hopefully that will become more clear as we go on. All right, so this is one of my first forms that really initiated me deep into sacred geometry, a form that I was just calling the soul star at the time, and I realized there's an infinite amount of varieties of soul stars, because it really just comes down to how your octahedron is breathing. Like if it's in the cube, if you get larger and larger and larger, there's an infinite amount of stopping points along there before you get to this point here. I was just calling them the soul star, definitely not attached to the soul star name, because this is just one example of many, but it's an important one because it's the midpoint one. It's the one that's halfway in the inflation point, halfway from here, from the cube, halfway to inflating to its full growth up over here. Okay, so this form looks like this, and I really gravitated to these shapes. They're actually just edges of a cube. There are actually eight of these cubes that are kind of going into this at a variety of different angles that we're not used to, but it's built off of a 90-degree edge here and 45 in the corners, but there are 8 of these, so it's like a star tetrahedron kind of. And I worked very diligently early on in sacred geometry trying to figure out how to draw this, and then I realized how simple it was a couple weeks ago, last week, that after all the long search of trying to figure out how to draw that, this was what it came down to, is just drawing it right into the fruit of life. It was right in there the whole time. Okay. So let's take it a little bit further because I've got some other forms that can be made. Let's go back into the cube. And now what we're going to do is look at our a structure that is just based off of that truncated octahedron, which is in the middle of this. This form is right in here. That's the same size square. Let me lay it up like that. This is inside this one. It's a truncated one. All I'm going to do is extend those lines until they intersect the edge of the cube. And then I come up with this cube that is made up of, it would make up a cube if we extended the lines. It would be 8 cuboctahedron connected here that we're looking at like this in the drawing. Well, the upper like this. So that's the drawing. This is the place where that truncated octahedron is, right on those edges of those lines. We extend the lines out in every direction. And as we're doing that, we're creating the cube octahedrons, the little cube octahedrons. In fact, I have made this out of the buckyballs. Let me see if I can pick this up without it breaking too well, breaking up. Let me get it here. Okay, so let's see if I can hold it just like this. It's very fragile, but this is just made out of all the struts, and it's got all the internal geometry in there of everything that I'm describing. And the reason this is easy to make, and I'll try and show you this at the end, is because everything's equal length and dividing into thirds along that length. This is that central cube octahedron. So this is 8 cube octahedrons, and inside it is going to have a star tetrahedron and an octahedron in the middle of it. All right, so I will show that at the end as long as it doesn't collapse before I get there. So this is, I'm taking away the cube now so we can look at the cube octahedrons. So remember, these cube octahedron are these shapes that I showed you earlier, but now there are 8 of them. So really we're getting into that concept that we have 8 again, right? The 8-star tetrahedron. And these are related to those 8-star tetrahedron, which I will get to a moment. Let's just look at it without the lines. So without the circles. So just picture this kind of crisscrossing here. We've got cube octahedron 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8. Well, hold on, let me count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 right here, and 1 on the back side of the form directly behind it, just like this. Right, so we're looking at it like that, and then the 1 is back here, right there. So a different kind of way to construct it, but we're going to now kind of connect this to the earlier form that we did, which was this vector equilibrium, which is all based on the lines of this, which was the star tetrahedrons. And the 8-star tetrahedron, actually what this is 8 little vector equilibriums coming together. So 8 vector equilibriums coming together, making a unified thing between those cube octahedrons and star tetrahedrons. So this and this are going to kind of come together, and we've got kind of a more complete picture of this isotropic vector matrix, which really wasn't including the additional cube octahedron lines that I just showed you with this form in the model that I built. But because the blocks are those little building blocks are very limited, you can kind of only do one or the other unless you make the model very large. But when we do combine both those together with the cube octahedron and the star tetrahedrons, the little one, we come up with this more unified structure of 8 vector equilibrium that are coming together. So I would call this more of the complete version of that. And once again, amazingly, all this tetrahedrons and cube octahedron and all these lines and crisscrossing things that I'm doing on here are still all just contained within the cube. And so that's where we've come so far. And then, okay, and then as Metatron's cube states, we've got all that stuff that I just showed you in there. It's all in there. It's great. And then we've got these other 2 Platonic solids in Metatron's cube, the icosahedron and dodecahedron. And okay, that's the end, the presentation pretty much. I do have about 40 more slides or so, yeah. But we're going to continue to go because really that's not the end of the presentation. Although it is the end for Metatron's cube without the phi ratio. That's the big issue here, because both of these forms, as I showed in other videos, are pretty much a geometric dead end for an expansion of relationships between forms. And basically what I'm going to show is how to work in a new way around this to help bring the phi ratio into the cube so we can depict the nesting of the Platonic solids in the cube as it was intended in Metatron's cube. So the drawing itself is, let's go way back here to the Metatron's cube drawing. It is these 39 lines, but they're not doing much more than just drawing two tetrahedrons and the octahedron at different scales. So we need to get a little out of the box and really out of the line and more into the circles, okay? And this is where we're going next. And this is the technique, so it's not the end, scratch that, not so fast. Phi is something to share here. This is the first golden circle that we need to add. Now it's a blue circle there, of course, but this is the technique that is very easy to do. And you do it at an earlier step than drawing all this. But we basically make a large circle off of the flower of life circle here, this yellow circle, and where that intersects this circle right here, you just draw a line at that intersection point over to the end of this vesica, and where that line hits your vertical line gives you a point that allows you to draw one phi ratio circle. I go over and over this in my apprenticeships and the Patreon site to just show how easy this is. I'm just dropping it into a pretty well complicated pattern with all the other circles, but it's such a simple technique, and it's going to open up a vast realm of possibilities that you're about to see of how we're going to convert Metatron's cube and the whole circle pattern into the golden circles, fruit of life and flower of life, and the golden Metatron's cube. I don't know what else to call them, but just maybe throw a golden in one with all those, because we're going to take the same circle pattern that is all over the place and inscribed in Egyptian temples and whatnot, designed over in many creative designs throughout history. And we're just going to drop little drops of water into each of those circles, and they're going to ripple out. We're going to have still our black circle in the middle, but now above and below that, we have two phi ratio circles. That's very, very important. And I'm going to get much more into the importance of just those circles and what they're about to do for our expansion in sacred geometry to nesting the Platonic solids into the cube. So let's come up with our first form. I'm calling it Phi-Con 1 because earlier in the slide, what I forgot to mention is Buckminster Fuller used to like to call this one a mecon or mecon. I don't know how he pronounced it, the truncated icosahedron. So I'm going to call these the Phi-Con 1 because there's going to be a Phi-Con 2. So let's see Phi-Con 1. Like thing 1 and thing 2, think Dr. Seuss. This is the first thing 1. Thing 1 is got the golden hexagon face. Now this form, this shape, the golden hexagon, is what has brought phi ratio relationships into that regular hexagon world of regular hexagons, truncated icosahedron. Everything is regularized, divided in these ways. This has always been called a non-uniform type of structure, and you very seldom see other geometers work with it in the truncated icosahedron, in the truncated octahedron, but I do see it occasionally around the truncated icosahedron, but this is the octahedron. So why am I putting this inside the form? Well, first of all, remember we did the other form, the truncated regular hexagon one. We did this rectangle on the black circle in the middle. And we're going to use the golden circle here, the blue circle, and we're going to draw the same rectangle there on each of these, intersecting those lines, just like we drew the other one. And we're going to connect all the dots and go over to this section where it connects to the blue and do all that. And we're going to come up with the blueprint to create this form, okay? The thing 1, the Phi-Con 1. And this is what it looks like without all that. It's, essentially the same form. It's just growing a little bit differently because of the phi ratio. And there's this, looking at it from this perspective, regular hexagon, golden hexagon, bigger square face. We're going to show the other one in just a moment. It's a smaller square faced one. And we can do the same types of things that we did with the regular one. Remember, I had the tetraxis hexahedron. The form for that one was this one right here. Remember that one? And that was related to this octahedron, truncated octahedron with the regular hexagon. Well, we can do that same thing with this one. And I have that form right here. It's just going to be, and these are to scale. I think these ones are to scale. Yeah, just about. It's just going to be a bigger octahedron because it's a little bit bigger. So it's just a little pointier than this one. This one's just a little more squished. This one's a little bit more fulfilling its way to going all of the distance and straightening out those edges till they become flat. So basically that edge can become flat. This is just a stopping point along the way, but it's a very important stopping point. And the only way to draw it is stopping at the blue phi ratio circles. Before we go on, I just want to show we can also do the Sol Star version of this one. It's just a little bit, here's the green one. Got a lot of forms around me now, but you know, so it's just a little bit higher up in its progression in the octahedron. It really is just about the octahedron getting larger and larger as we go. But I'm not just having fun with octahedrons here and seeing how they scale. We're stopping there for a specific reason, because inside this, if I start drawing some lines and connecting the dots across, so I'm going to do one first. I'm going to go right across that upper square, which is, you're looking at it like that. Let's orient it to how you're looking in the drawing, like that. And yep, right there. So the bar is going across the top. And then I'm going to make a triangle in the golden hexagon, which you see right here. And then I'm going to just do that all the way around. I'm going to, you know, do another line here, another bar here. So why am I doing all these lines? Well, right inside this truncated octahedron, it's inside the cube. Remember, this is sitting right inside this cube, just like this, right in there. Well, that is going to show us the icosahedron. The icosahedron is now sitting and nesting inside the cube. So here's our icosahedron. Here it is, lined up. This edge of the icosahedron is the top edge. It's in contact with the surface of that cube, tilting it back. This edge that you're looking at right on front is right in front. If I drag it back to the side, this edge would be on this face over where my finger's tapping. And of course, this edge would be butting up to the other one here. So that is the nested icosahedron inside the cube that is showing that Metatron's cube, yes, it does contain all of these, but Metatron's cube really isn't a line drawing. We're just kind of calling that Metatron's cube. And I'll show more reasons why that those lines are not really depicting the nesting of the Platonic solids, but here we are showing Metatron's, this version of Metatron's golden cube, showing that these do have a relationship to the cube, a very intimate relationship, because the edges and faces are touching, and that's sacred geometry. This is a real, truthful relationship that's happening here. And really all it took to do that was just to draw these 13 extra blue circles with one simple little technique of drawing that golden ratio circle and just repeating the circles in all these. So it was not too much extra to do, and then we can have our icosahedron in this drawing, and the hexagon, remember, is a regular hexagon from that view. It will be tilted to the side. It's not straight on like Metatron's cube depicts, where it takes over the hexagon. It's either the cube is going to be that hexagon or the icosahedron is going to be that hexagon. They can't both be the same at once structurally in the geometry as a geometric template for the nesting of the Platonic solids. So we need one of those to shift. And prior to this, almost all my drawings that I've been sharing with you have been the cube adjusting to the fivefold symmetry of the icosahedron. So the icosahedron is central. And like I said earlier, we're doing this all with the cube. And there's not just one icosahedron. Things like to come in pairs. just like the two tetrahedron joined together in a unified way. Well, this now shows that, well, if I've got a square face here and I can do it one way with this, well, I can do it both ways. And I can crisscross two triangles and kind of create another paired, mated pair dual connection relationship between two forms that are a more unified structure, all contained within the cube here, and also just neatly in this truncated octahedron, just within this golden hexagon face truncated octahedron. And that's the key, because the vertices of these triangles are lining up on the points of the golden hexagon. And this, of course, relates to Coxeter's icosahedron, 59 icosahedron stellation diagram. When you really start to dig into sacred geometry and look at the most recent geometers and mathematicians that don't get much airtime in the sacred geometry world, but took their sacred geometry to another level, they are showing this golden hexagon over and over and over again in all those diagrams. That was the first place that I started to find it, because I couldn't actually find it in any sacred geometry book. There's only one other person that has any writing that ever mentions the word golden hexagon, a researcher in India that did a couple hand-drawn line drawings of it. And other than that, I can't find much on it talking about the golden ratio hexagon. And of course, what I mean by that is that this edge is in golden proportion to the long edge, short edge in golden proportion all the way to the other long edges. And it still has a 120-degree angle on the inside. That was just this compound form. I'd have to draw some other lines to kind of depict it, like really blending together, but I didn't go into the detail of that. Okay, so we did FICON 1. Thing 1 has been done. What's thing 2 got in store for us? Well, thing 2 is another golden hexagon, but just picture that this golden hexagon is very simple. It's funny how the golden hexagons work, because if I just flip it around in the drawing and base it on the new red phi circle, so that's the other golden ratio circle. So you can look at this as like, if this were, let's say, 1-inch diameter circle, the blue circle would be 1.618, and the red circle would be the 0.618. So on either side of that central point, well, no, excuse me, that's not the way that's going to work. I'd have to do the math a little bit, but let's say this is 0.5. That's the way to look at it. 0.5 diameter. This is 0.618, just a tad bit above it, right? And then just below it would be 0.38. I believe that's the phi ratio below the 0.618. So if this is 0.5, so really, because that's the equilibrium circle. The black circle is the equilibrium circle. And we just showed that we went out to the 0.618 circle, the blue one, and that one we drew the larger square face. Remember, this is really why we're doing this, is because we're getting these different size square faces. So there's the regular square face, the equilibrium one with the regular hexagon. There's the larger one with the 0.618 to get a larger square. And we've got the smaller phi ratio circle in the inside of that is the smaller one. So it's going to look like that compared to the large one. And this one is the midpoint between the two, the regular hexagon one. So this is all about equilibrium, the vector equilibrium, the Cuboctahedron, everything in Metatron's cube. The original drawing of what we call Metatron's cube is all about the equilibrium state. This, adding these extra circles, which are disequilibrious, as Buckminster Fuller called it, disequilibrium was more around the icosahedron, in being a perfected version of disequilibrium, as I like to call it, because these forms are still fitting into the Platonic solids of creation. So how do we fit them into Metatron's cube? Instead of doing the 39 circles, 39 lines, we need to work with the circles. And we have 39 circles on here, but we do need to add a few little ones to get this going. So anyway, FICON 2, here's thing 2. And we're going to do the same thing. I'll kind of go through this fast. I don't have this little tetraxis hexahedron built for this one, but I did make the little soul star. And, you know, these you just have to kind of, they're very subtle to see the differences, but there's the intermediate one, probably be a bigger difference between the blue and the red one. You could see it's a little bit higher because the octahedron now is getting closer to being back inside the cube. So it's going, it's deflating. The octahedron is shrinking down, but it's stopping at this very important point to give us another edge length. There's the Soul Star version of that. So without the, we're going to do the same, let's do the same edge thing, right? I'm going to draw a line within this across the square face, and then I'm going to do triangles within this. It actually comes up with a form that I built a few months ago, because I had all these forms built. I'm just now able to articulate it. It comes up with this, which is, it's actually the jitterbug in a stopping point of where the dodecahedron will be. We just don't have the cube in it to turn it into a dodecahedron at this point. But we have this edge length, this edge length, and this edge length. We have all the key edge lengths that are fitting in the cube. We just need a small phi ratio cube to stick out just a little bit on the surface of these triangles. So check, this is cool. I never knew I could draw this so easily, but there it is, this little unnamed shaped, but it is actually, if you were to take that jitterbug, you could stop it right at this key intersection point. The jitterbug is that flexible structure, oh, it's too far away, that Buckminster Fuller came up, and this is one of the transitions. He showed the transition of the icosahedron in it, and because it had all the edges of the icosahedron that it needed to kind of show that. It didn't have all the edges, but it could stop and show the pentagons, but it didn't, this one didn't have the extra points in it. So what we need to do in our drawing is add these little purple phi ratio circles. They're still in phi proportion going down, but that gives us a phi proportion cube, this big black one, this phi proportion cube inside the larger cube. So now we've got a small cube that's not the halfway cube that we call the, you know, the 4D hypercube view, you know, because that's the one that would be on the equilibrium black circles. This one is stopping at the phi ratio point on these little circles. So we are introducing a new cube inside the cube, and that then allows us to pick up the vertices that we need to create our dodecahedron from this perspective. So there's our next Platonic solid. And now we have shown that all 5 Platonic solids are in the cube nested within inside the edge lengths here. See the edges now, this darker blue line is the edge length that is from red circle to red circle. It has to jump over to the little new phi ratio circle I put, which is very easy to do in the drawing, nothing big at all. I mean, I showed, you know, I show how to get that quite easily. And then you hop over to here, and then you hop around, you go around, you get the outer hull. But now we have our dodecahedron as it's orthogonally projected. The best way to be a geometer to build these things is to work with this perspective, because then you could translate your templates of the drawing to your actual construction of the forms that are around me, and many other permutations of that and learnings along the way, and coming up with you know, the transition forms of the fundamental shape of that cuboctahedron, how it really does contain these vertices stopping points, was all just constructed by using this template that showed me the proportions that I needed to figure out how to get the right size triangle and this edge and all that. I just did from these drawings. So here are the another combination, the 2 pairs coming together of the 2 dodecahedron, because there are not just one in there, just like the icosahedron, there was a second one in there. And that actually constructed a new form that that I made here too. Well, there's the small little, here's our truncated Icosi Octahedron in there, right, with the golden hexagon faces, with the small square faces. But now because I added that little phi ratio cube to this, it's going to pop out through that face of that golden hexagon. and create a vertice out there. And then I just connect the dots and put in these struts. And then I have this shape here, which is the combination of both of those. And it really is just still a truncated octahedron here that is just missing its top. That's why that's the square face. But this right here is inside the cube because it's all in there with the little phi ratio cube. So our drawing brought us to this place. I guess I wrote here, I called it the newhedron, K-N-E-W-hedron. So if I'm going to name anything, what to call this, I'll call it the newhedron. So there's my first named form. So there it is by itself, the newhedron inside the red circles. And now you could see how important these circles are into dividing the lines. Now, I didn't do it in this video, but if we do these outer circles, we can start to truncate the outer edges of the cube too, and come up with the not just inner forms that are in this, but start to truncate the cube itself in phi ratio. And there's quite a lot of forms to explore there for people who are interested in working with phi circles and truncating cube in different shapes of phi proportion along the edges. So we can now combine both of our Platonic solids, the dodecahedron and icosahedron. Now I've switched colors on you. The icosahedron's back to blue. The red is the dodecahedron. They're both tilted to the side because they are inside the cube. So I'm about to get to the compound of the two of those forms. If we connect the dots between the two, come up to the rhombic tricontahedron, which is this one right here. And it's sitting inside your cube, and you're looking at it just like this, tilted to the side. And that flat face of that, which is a diamond-shaped face, is in surface contact with this cube that it is oriented and positioned in. That face is flush to the top surface of that. And now we have all the Platonic solids and the rhombic tricontahedron all nested within the one cube. There it is by itself. And we need the golden circles here to pick up all the vertices, because this one's on the red, this one's on the blue. And they are meeting at the red here and the blue there. So it's all made up of that. And there's a compound of the two rhombic tricontahedron, because if we got one, we could do two. We could just layer those over top of each other. One other form that I'd like to mention here is the Icosi Dodecahedron, because it's a compound of 5 octahedron. Remember, the octahedron is this one here that was inside the cube. And that form is the dual of this one, the rhombic tricontahedron, the previous one. And each of these vertices on this are touching the surface, the inner face, crisscross these lines on here. Right at the center is a vertice that this form, one vertice will be touching that point. And that's one octahedron. It's made of 5 of these. And we could see that this point here on the surface of the cube, and this one down here on the surface of the cube, and this one here on the surface of the cube, the face of it, those are representing one of those octahedron that are inside that Icosi dodecahedron. And we can also draw that form with inside our structure based on the previous drawing of the rhombic tricontahedron. Okay, we're going to keep going, because now, just like I showed you earlier, we have the 8, remember this one here, the 5 cuboctahedron. I love working with the golden cuboctahedron, and I can also make a structure of 5 golden cuboctahedron. And the first version of it, actually, this is like a transformer. If I pull that off and flip-flop it this way, we're going to get the other example of it on the other side. So let me get this set up, flip that over there. So if I flip-flop them, oh, I split it in the wrong way. Oh, it's got to be this side. So I take it apart, I got to move it this way, I take the whole thing, and then I've got my larger faced octahedron. So we're about to do that. Now picture this like this, and it is, there's my upper surface of this truncated octahedron. with that square face that is larger, that's the phi con 1, it's going to go over to the edges of the cube, and then we're going to come out with this form. So let's just go through that quickly. And these are now 8 golden cuboctahedron, but more importantly, what they're doing is they're also showing that the icosahedron was within this layout, as I demonstrated earlier. So this is allowing the icosahedron to be in there. And here it is just without the circles. All right, so now this is where the cool transformer part comes in, because just as I have the large octahedron, because remember, the reason we're doing this is we're including the icosahedron. Previously, perfect equilibrium, no icosahedron. This is just perfect cuboctahedron. We need the golden hexagon face to turn this into the points to give you the icosahedron. And now in the next slide, I've got to turn this back around and go to the smaller version. I split it in the wrong spot again. Only have one way I can do it. There we go. Flip-flop these. Those go back together. And now I've turned that into the smaller square. Line that up a little better. There's the smaller square one. So that's the phi con 2 with the little tiny square version of that, which is this one here. So that's that one. But we are now got the extended lines to turn it all into 8 golden cuboctahedron. And this is the one that gives us the dodecahedron, right? So in one of my videos that I demonstrated this, this structure, which is actually the vertice points of both of those, and the midpoint of this would be the place of perfect balance, which would be this cuboctahedron shape. And I devised this, and it perfectly fit in, happened to fit right inside this Zoom tool setup. But this would be 8 of those structures coming together, just like in this design that I'm showing here, showing the Trinity vision of all 3 truncated versions are really all part of one structure, to just show the variability and flexibility that the dodecahedron and the icosahedron are within this. That video, not forgetting the name, it will be in our description link, so you could see a whole video just about this amazing form. And so many new sacred geometry discoveries within that one. Okay, so we are going to take that Trinity division apart just so you could see now the 3 of them all laid out together. We've got the phi con 1, the phi con 2, and this one was based on the mecon, and you could see the triangles are different. These 2 are in golden proportion. This is the midway point between them. So there's very little difference between the midpoint to going a little bit larger with phi or a little bit smaller with phi. The main point, just to get it across why we're doing all this, is to show that phi ratio is engaged in this, and including the extra Platonic solids. These are those truncated octahedron, the largest one above the midpoint. The purple one is the midpoint. The red one is the smaller version of that. And we could put that all back in the cube, because remember, this whole video is about the cube and what it contains, one single cube containing the cuboctahedron, which would be the perfect point of balance along here. We keep truncating it along till we get the golden hexagon one, then we get the regular hexagon one until we get to the smaller phi one. But there's an infinite amount of variety along those truncation points. And the here Metatron's cube has gone plaid because I've laid out all the extension lines of these shapes all together, blended together, mixed in one, and just framed it all in a cube because it's all in the cube. And even the star tetrahedron version of that, which was, put the star tetrahedron in there, and we got this was in there, the star tetrahedron going across with the cuboctahedron. It's just one big plaid party with this drawing. Okay, some closing comments now that are just kind of going through everything that we have done. The main purpose of this is one to show how sacred geometry in the cube can contain all the Platonic solids as they're, what I feel meant to be being shown is how they all nest within this cube that we call Metatron's cube. And we can use the same flower of life template that we've always used to do that. And if we don't add phi ratio circles, this is what we will be with here, okay? We will get the octahedron, the cube, and the tetrahedron, the star tetrahedron. And of course, all the other things I showed you previously, and many, many other things. And there are ways to devise drawing these forms, but you have to use golden ratio to do this, to get the icosahedron and dodecahedron. The simplest technique that I've been finding to be able to do that is just to add these additional circles within there. And then what we're doing is we're showing how these are now related to the cube. Because remember, this point is touching the surface of the cube. This is going along the faces of the cubes. This is going along the face. This is going along the face. And we put the icosa and dodecahedron together, and then we even get the rhombic tricontahedron all nested in the cube. All right. And so this, these are the true golden ratio forms, you know, that are builder's template to be able to be drawn orthogonally. So we can work with this as the natural pattern of building blocks of creation and work with these forms and see how they're depicted this way. I believe this is what Metatron's cube was meant to be showing. And when I compare that to this, I have to draw a line now, a kind of more hard line, that these two are not really helping us in sacred geometry. What they're really doing, as I've been contemplating, is they're basically saying there's a thing that called an icosahedron and a dodecahedron that exist, but we don't know how to draw it really. So this is our best bet that looks like it fits over this. Now, of course, that's not true because people have been building these forms and working with all the dimensions, and there are other geometers out there who have drawn these. And of course, on the Wikipedia sites, they're orthogonally drawn, but they really take a big step away from the rest of the Platonic solids like these, because these are all builder block things like I showed you. I can build with these, and it's not all about building, but it is about expanding our consciousness. And that is going to be how we relate to sacred geometry through our creative expression. And our creative expression at this point is not done well with sacred geometry, utilizing this as the template of creation, this Metatron's cube fruit of life, without the phi ratio in it. So as you can see here, one quick way to demonstrate why this is true here, that this, at least for the icosahedron and the dodecahedron, I have plenty of videos on that. But let's just take that big equilateral triangle that we see on the inside the hexagon here, right? Now, an equilateral triangle, if I just send that line down, this is supposed to have 20 sides of a icosahedron. You got the equilateral triangle in the middle. If I rotate that now to you, this is completely flat, right? The icosahedron is not completely flat. It is curved. So if I just bend this slightly like this and this, it's getting much closer. And I didn't probably do it at the proper angle, but if I look at my icosahedron here, I can hold it up to you. There it is flat. You can see if I turn it to the side, that flat face, well, those are curving downward. I guess they're at an even steeper angle. They're curving downward. So if I hold it to you like this, well, that equilateral triangle edge that's being depicted here without the phi ratio, this doesn't go straight. It goes with this little bend, right? And that is the necessary ingredient to turn this from an octahedron, because that's really what we're looking at there, is basically this octahedron big triangle with another triangle in it, and then a line that goes the length of this face. So I'm sorry, it is almost, I don't even know that's what it is. It's lines drawn on an octahedron. And this form doesn't help us much either. Sorry to go off there a little bit. I know people highly respect and value these, but I do too highly respect and value the direction sacred geometry is heading. And I believe this is going to have a lot more capacity for people to grow in their relationship to sacred geometry and expand their consciousness through this medium. Now, here's my drawn line again. And the true golden forms here, when we remove all the lines, we can just show they're nicely nested in here. They're touching the faces as I've shown. And then I have to ask, what is going on with the nesting of these forms? See, this edges aren't going to be touching here at all. It's basically just drawing it inside that cube. And we took those lines a little bit too seriously to think that those 39 lines will give you everything you need. And we forgot about the circle. You know, the 39 circles or 6 extra 45 circles that can draw all the stuff that I've shown you are really the missing ingredient for, you know, for readjusting this whole course correction from this these two structures that are highly popularized out there. So this edge length you can see is clearly below there, but remember, this is supposed to be a pentagon here, a regular faced pentagon that's tilted away. And this edge here, if you measure to this edge here, is so out of far proportion of phi, it's I don't know what to say. It's just, it's not good. But if you look at this one here, this is in phi proportion to this edge here. If it was drawn as a straight line, those two would be in phi proportion. So anyway, that's my only little piece on this one. But see, it's going to go beyond the cube, and that's really the reason why this important part of, you know, not the reason, but a reason is that once we start to correct our way of drawing those forms, it opens up a window of possibility to start to explore all these other forms that are really a lot off the radar of many people getting interested in sacred geometry. I know when I got into it, they were like, whoa, what are these? These are the Kepler points. So these are regular star polyhedra. They have to be based on pentagon stars in the phi proportion, which means you need dodecahedron and icosahedron symmetry to express itself through our pattern language. And these points are now given in our golden circle, you know, extended flower of life, fruit of life structure. I believe they're easier to draw if we reorient the whole thing to the hexagon perspective, where this would be oriented this way. But I'm just demonstrating here that these phi ratio circles are allowing us to go beyond the cube into a 5-cube perspective, where we are now getting the great dodecahedron and the small stellated dodecahedron, which have perfect pentagon stars within them in a stellated star formation, which is just fantastic. And this is the great stellated one, which actually, this is where it kind of got to a breaking point in this pattern. And it's actually better, in my view, to switch this whole hexagon that this is contained in, reorient it to be the cube, the hexagon that the cube was in. Okay, but I'm just showing that this is now possible to continue our expansion just with the cube in the underlying structure here. Because really, I feel that the 5-cube perspective, where we orient the dodecahedron rather than it being tilted off the side and nested in the cube, is really moving more towards the idea that the dodecahedron, the rhombic tricontahedron, the icosahedron, those are more the outer hexagon shape, because the 5 cubes of the dodecahedron, so these 5 cubes, 1, 2, these are the hexagon ones, these are long rectangle ones. Picture these 5 coming together to hold the vertices of the dodecahedron. And in this is in the Rhombic Tricontahedron video. This is a 90 face form that I have a whole video on previous to this. This whole form, this doesn't have to move at all, the Rhombic Tricontahedron. It stays stationary the whole time. It's the cube that is orienting around this, and the whole thing just fits in the dodecahedron. So one of the main questions that I'll be leaving you all with is, you know, we can do this drawing both ways, as I've demonstrated. You know, the cube can be the primary point of concentration within this drawing, and when we can draw the Platonic solids nested in, as I've demonstrated in this video. The whole video has been about this view of the containing these, and then the other way to do it is to make the rhombic tricontahedron the hexagon, which is now this form that's inside the cube, turn it into the overall perspective here. And that includes all of this. It includes the icosahedron, dodecahedron. It includes the 5 compounds cube, which is the dodecahedron, 10 tetrahedra compound, the Icosi Dodecahedron, which is the 5 octahedra compound. It just is carrying more information, really, at this point, as an expansion and carrying, but they're both drawn with the same template, and they have quite a different feel. And I really appreciate both ways of drawing it because they help me to see more and teach me more from both ways of doing it, because I can really work with cubic structure this way really, really easily, of building them off of one another. And this allows me to really get deep into the expansion of phi ratio forms in terms of its infinite compression or expansion, and stellations that come forth from working through this perspective. So I really love them both. The one thing I'll say is that this, without phi ratio and this cube here, is really just the basics of this one. Once we had these other golden ratio circles, that really opens this up. So it's really, as I see, kind of like, this is really what's out there right now that is very highly popularized. And of course, the techniques I'm presenting here don't have to be the way that we go with this or anything, obviously. I'm just putting out some possibilities, but I do see that this is helping to revolutionize the cube in a golden way. And that this is really, another jump to a 5 cube perspective of how these forms relate, rather than just through a 1 cube perspective. This is more of the 5 cube perspective. And we could take that whole pattern. This is the last slide. This is unlimited possibilities with these golden circle forms that can be created. Like I said, we can truncate the outer edges, and we can expand that out with many different size circles. Any size circle can be in here. You can come up with a new form tomorrow. Just start dropping some circles in there and figure out the lengths of those truncations. It's all there in that template. All right, so that was the full-on presentation. Quite a lot of information in there. I hope you did take some breaks. I didn't prompt them along the way. I have all these forms laid out here. I'm definitely not going to go back through those at all. I'm going to put the link in the video to show you this one. The Rhombic Dodecahedron video is based on this form. This form is nested inside this form. And yes, we could all put this inside this cube, right? But remember, this one cube, there are 5 of them in this one. So it's kind of which one came first, the single cube or the 5 cube in the dodecahedron. One way I said this recently was, the cube represents the earth in metaphysical way of looking at sacred geometry, and this represents the ether. Now, everything is meant to be in the ether, so the earth would be part of the 5, but the earth contains everything in the ether too. So we could put the dodecahedron back in here. So it's maybe no sense to get into which way to look at it. Just be thankful that we have multiple perspectives and ways of relating, because something new will be unlocked through every way we engage in that. This one is the stellated, it could be a great dodecahedron, but this would be a dodecahedron at the center, the small stellated dodecahedron in there, expanding out to give us our icosahedron around the outer edge, all based on the 5-fold symmetry. And yes, maybe it's even to scale. I could put this whole structure, right back into the cube again. So it's really fascinating to look at it that way. This is one last Zoom tool model that is just going to go over. We'll hold it like this. There's a cube on the inside of this, the blue struts that are the cube. Octahedron is the teal inside, vertices coming towards you, and the ones out to the sides and above. That's the star tetrahedron. That's only 1 cube being shown in here. There are actually 5 which would go around here. These purple points are the icosahedron points. And the dodecahedron would be this blue cross pieces that are these pentagon faces. So this form right here is containing the whole nesting structures that I've just shown you. And it really does culminate so many times in my explorations of sacred geometry, of building the forms and thinking I'm onto some form I've never seen before, coming back to this rhombic tricontahedron. So this is the form that I really feel is highly related to. You know, a long time ago, basically, I said everybody, probably by this point, every kid knows what a cube is in a block. We play with these all the time, right? And everybody knows a 6-sided dice. There are 30-sided dice out there, which are like this. My speculation is, as time goes on and we continue to hopefully evolve in our relationship to beautiful earth and beautiful beings and relating to each other in more holistic ways, and somehow sacred geometry is part of that transformation, the sound of vibration and healing and all those things that are happening simultaneously, that every kid on earth will grow up knowing what this form is at some point, and knowing that all these things are contained within this. And what's next beyond this? The other things too, but this would be quite a quantum leap in our evolutionary trajectory of our expanding consciousness. And sacred geometry and the drawings of that, besides all the forms that I'm showing you, are part of that process. This is so stimulating to the memory, the newness, the KNEW newness, to relate with these diagrams in a way that they're containing the 5 proportions to these forms. I just did this one with the apprentices this past week. This is the rhombic tricontahedron. It's based on what we drew, nesting the Icosi Dodecahedron inside it, as if this cube, these octahedron that make this up, would be in the 5 cubes that are in this. I know that's a lot. Maybe you have to look at the video to see what I meant by that again. But you know, it really got prompted from, you know, working again with either the nesting of the, this is illustrate this here. This is now if I draw the icosahedron as the central hexagon with the circles around it. And then now I've rotated the cube to align to nesting that icosahedron in there. That one cube, I can easily draw a dodecahedron and show all 5 cubes. One point about that is that only 6, the icosahedron has 30 faces, right? So only 6 are represented here. Well, what happened to the other 24 faces, the other 24 edges of the icosahedron? Well, they're supposed to also have cubes touching them. And that's the 5 cubes of the dodecahedron that aren't drawn here. But if I just go along here and I go over here and I go there, I'm starting to create the pentagon faces. That gives me the 5 cubes. And one last drawing, the previous one would be this one here, is now reorienting that whole diagram to what I showed in the video. Is the cube is the central hexagon, and now we have the golden circles. This is all drawn in the Flower of Life version of this, and I've got my cube, my icosahedron nested in there. Now, the one thing is I tried to draw the rhombic Tricontahedron in here, and I know I'm going on and on at this point. We're about to wrap up, but this is the rhombic Tricontahedron drawing, and from the hexagon perspective, and I couldn't figure out how to draw this from putting this in the cube as if this hexagon was a cube. This one basically said, you know, in order to draw me, you're gonna have to put me, you're gonna have to put the 5 cubes in me. You know, the 5 cubes are gonna have to be around me, because this is inside the tricontahedron. Very, lot of golden circles had to go into this at seed of life at 2 scales. So the seed of life was in here and then it came out again. And this really wanted to say, I've got to be front and center on this. I can't twist to the side and have be in the cube that way. It still is in the cube, but it really wanted to show me that this was the way that it wanted to be presented. Okay, so that was a little show and tell at the end. I hope you enjoyed seeing some of that. I teach the drawings in the apprenticeship, you know, starting out simpler and working up, but even beginners, who have only drawn a few times, we start to delve into this and really dive. So check that out. I got another one coming up in September, and my Patreon site has got a series of lessons that walk people through sacred geometry, getting you used to drawing techniques from very basic, starting with just the seed of life and introducing golden circles. And I write about 5 pages a month and add new pieces to that with a live Q&A once a month too. So check some of those out. I've got a New Geometers Facebook group, which is growing. It's hit past 1,000, which is just so exciting. So I'm really grateful for the awesome participation. I learned so much there. So thanks to all you out there that are checking that out or are involved in that. And that's it. I mean, I'm very grateful to have shared all this. This has been a long journey of really studying Metatron's cube and trying to ask these deep questions of like, where are the other Platonic solids? How do they fit in there? So hopefully you found some great insight in this and helped you grow in your own relationship to sacred geometry, from the basics to the basics all the way through. Those are the basics of sacred geometry. All right, much love, everyone, and peace.